What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're going over the wide receiver starts and sits. I just finished watching the Thursday game, and boy, that was a good one. After a slow start, we seem to have turned it around, but you guys are in the future. You're on Saturday, so we don't need to talk too much about that. Let's get into the wide receivers. I obviously will not have as much information available to me at the time of recording that you guys will. So make sure you tune in to tomorrow's video, which will be the news and injury updates, everything that you need to know for week 5 of the NFL. And even if you have questions after this video on who you should start, wide receiver or running back, it doesn't matter. Go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Take a look at our rankings. It's a very simple process. All you have to do is take the two players that you're deciding between, look them both up on our rankings. Whichever player is ranked ahead of the other, that's the one we recommend you putting in your lineup. Really, it's that simple of a process. So if you want access to that and more, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. But let's get into the wide receiver starts and sits. We're going to go through each and every matchup. And I wish I could start with one that would really excite you, but it's the Bills versus the Titans. And nobody's really starting anyone too high of draft capital in this game. I mean, you have A.J. Brown, who is a waiver wire gem that you just picked up this week, likely, or have been stashing on your bench. I would recommend you keep him there. The Bills have been extremely stingy to wide receivers, especially on the outside, and A.J. Brown, while he is a superior talent, he is very unlikely to be able to bust a big one versus this stingy defense who ranks inside the top 12. As for the Bills, John Brown, we had him as a sit last week. He definitely did underperform. It was to be expected, but he is still the main target in this offense, and while this defense is extremely stingy, we can now actually condone you putting him back in your lineup. The only thing that really matters is that you set your expectations for him correctly, which is that he's more of a low-end wide receiver too, high upside flex play type of guy this week. We do, however, have the Eagles versus the Jets, and it appears as though Sam Darnold is trending towards playing again. Check RotoWorld for an update on that. If he doesn't play, though, the only real impact is that you really can't start Robbie Anderson. I would be excited to start Robbie Anderson if I owned him on my lineup or traded for him during this down period. We saw a struggling Devontae Adams just completely explode against them, and it's not like he was the first case. This Eagles defense in the secondary has been giving up yards and chunk plays for years now. They allow themselves to be beat through the air with help from over the top from safety, so Robbie Anderson should have a good day. Jamison Crowder has a lot of opportunity here as well. We did see him getting in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 targets in the absence of Darnold, so his involvement is almost guaranteed. Chris Herndon is not back yet, but keep an eye out for him in the upcoming weeks. As for the Eagles, Alshon Jeffrey, not stoked about it. He definitely has been disappointing so far this fantasy season. Yes, he did score last week, and that helped retain his value, so to speak, but even in this good matchup, it's tough not to feel a little nervous about his production. We still have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver too, just based on the value of the position in this offense. But remember, even with an injured receiving core, they still have a ton of depth at the position. On the plus side, Nelson Agholor, he did only get 1 target last week. Unfortunately, the Eagles team itself is really difficult to trust. So while there's definitely upside in this wide receiver too, it's not one that you should feel comfortable putting all your chips in. We have the Cardinals versus the Bengals, which at first glance seems like a game that you want to skip immediately, but it's hard to find two hungrier teams finding themselves in a matchup that they both believe is extremely beatable. And while frankly both teams do kind of suck, I think they'll both put on their best performances, aka Tyler Boyd, very high on this week. Could be one of the last weeks we see him without AJ Green, John Ross on IR. What's new? Could mean a bump for Tyler Eifert. However, he's been healthy for quite possibly his longest stretch of his career with Andy Dalton and has produced absolutely nothing. Christian Kirk, unlikely to play. Information is still limited though. He could come back as early as next week, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what the verdict is. Now, this immediately impacts the value of Larry Fitzgerald, who's been quietly having a great season and will continue to do so in his absence. The biggest beneficiary though, that's going to be Andy Isabella, who certainly will be stepping up and receiving the majority of the targets left behind by Kirk. And I would recommend rostering him if he is not on anyone's team. We were actually high on him heading into the draft, but still it remains nothing more than a speculative ad. and one I'm sure a lot of owners are not interested in me breaking down, and that is the Raiders versus the Bears. And the reason being is because a lot of you own Tyrell and a lot of you own Allen Robinson, both of which are probably going to remain buy low candidates after this week, because Allen Robinson, he just lost his quarterback, and while we aren't afraid of that factor as much as maybe your neighbor will be, the truth is people are panicking. And Allen Robinson has been nothing short of spectacular besides scoring a couple touchdowns, which that should likely turn around, and everything else to him looks basically golden. Air yards, target market share, snap percentage, everything you would basically want in a legit wide receiver one without the quarterback or the potent offense. We can't really expect the offense to improve without Trubisky, but it's hard to imagine it gets all that much worse. For the Raiders, it's very similar to last week where it's just a tough matchup, and now, he has been safe, he has been consistent, so he does deserve a spot in your lineup if you don't have any better options. But just keep in mind that wide receiver 2 production that you're getting used to, it's against the Bears. So he's more of a flex play if anything, and that which has a low floor. Moving forward, we have an interesting divisional matchup between Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the New Orleans Saints. And while initially you would think this is going to be a shootout, remember we do not have Drew Brees in this matchup. Jameis Winston, he's been looking pretty good. The offense is running smoothly. Expect a good game from Mike Evans as well as Chris Godwin, who we both have ranked inside of the top 12. Godwin trailing just behind. Michael Thomas, he's still ranked as a back-end wide receiver 1, and he has good chemistry with Teddy Bridgewater. Just keep in mind that luck is eventually going to end, because Teddy Bridgewater just does not look that great. Now, unless he just completely flips it around and surprises all of us, Michael Thomas is eventually going to suffer. I wouldn't expect that week to be this week, because Tampa Bay and that offense is going to force the Saints to have to put up some offense themselves. Vikings versus the Giants, and it's time to see if the squeaky wheel really does get the oil, because Adam Thielen has been speaking up about not getting the ball enough, and his fantasy owners definitely feel it. Stephon Diggs is also apparently requesting a trade, so it's a complete mess over there. The only one that has to be happy is got to be Dalvin Cook, because the dude's running up and down the field. But Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen are going to be starts, but if you have a locked and loaded wide receiver too, someone, we cannot fault you for starting him over these Vikings receivers. Now, on the Giants side of the ball, we get Golden Tate back. What to make of that? Not too much. Still going to start Shepard. Ravens versus Steelers in a divisional matchup, which it's not expected to get much over 44.5 points. So not a whole ton of fantasy production to go around. Marquise Brown, he's in a really solid spot. He disappointed last week, but don't hesitate to put him in your lineup. He's getting the volume. He has the ability. And the Steelers are definitely susceptible when it comes to that type of receiver. So take advantage of it. Mark Andrews, don't shy away from him. He still has over a 20% target market share in this offense. And for the tight ends, you really don't see that very often. As for the Steelers, though, it's a complete mess. Juju, don't get me started. We really need a bounce back game from him, because if not, benching him for a better option is not going to be out of the question. Now, keep an eye on him on Sunday to see if he plays, but Patriots versus Redskins, and unfortunately, Terry McLaurin is probably going to have to slow down for this one game just because it's an impossible matchup for him. Stephon Gilmore has been completely dominating wide receivers, and Terry McLaurin, being a rookie, although he has looked good, has no chance in this matchup without a little luck on his side. Trey Quinn, not worth mentioning. For the Patriots receivers, Philip Dorsett has been a bright spot in this offense. They use him in many different formations, and he's really versatile. Continue to see him improve on his numbers and get more involved in the offense. Josh Gordon, I do expect this to be probably one of his biggest games, if not his biggest game. Dorsett we have ranked as a back-end wide receiver 3. Gordon, he is a locked and loaded wide receiver 2. Jags versus Panthers, and this is probably going to be the game Minshew might struggle for once. It's hard to imagine he continues it against the Panthers defense, which has surprisingly been good against the pass. Chark, though, we do have as a borderline flex, but more of one you should avoid at all costs. For more, and Curtis Samuel, they're playing Jacksonville. And Jacksonville's been a bit hot and cold so far this season when it comes to their passing defense. And I understand that Kyle Allen has been piping hot, but they're both back-end wide receiver 3s. Either one could realistically outscore the other. It's going to come down to variance, but if you own both, you're definitely not starting both, and especially against this defense. Falcons versus Texans, and DeAndre Hopkins has been absolutely disappointing. I could say he's probably responsible for a lot of teams starting off really slow. Expect him to bounce back eventually, and this could very well be the game. It's against the Falcons, who are trying to redeem themselves on offense. Julio Jones, locked and loaded wide receiver 1 along with Hopkins. Give us the choice between those two. We're still taking Julio, but just to let you know, we have them ranked back-to-back at 1 and 2 this week, so we're really expecting fireworks from those two. Ridley, we have him ranked in the 20s, the low 20s, and it's really because Mohamed Sanu has been sneaking in and taking a lot of his production. Don't forget, Austin Hooper is actually a top 5 tight end right now, and the one person that definitely feels impacted from that has been Calvin Ridley. And until that changes, it's tough to imagine Ridley is going to be one of the main focal points in this offense. Now, I would start him, though, over Will Fuller, who has also been, unsurprisingly, a disappointment. Last game was presumably going to be the boom game, and that game is still coming. But the more times you plug him into your lineup and hope for it, the more risk you're putting onto your team. We still have him ranked as a flex-level player, but so far he's definitely been doing more harm than good. Broncos versus Chargers, and it depends on where the coverage goes, but it could lead to more opportunities for someone like Deshaun Hamilton, who might get the lighter end of coverage. And for the Broncos offense, it's going to be difficult for Flacco. We know he's not one of the better quarterbacks when it comes to arm talent, and while this game doesn't have one of the lower over-unders, the Broncos side of things is not projected to score a whole lot of points, so expect most of the scoring to be done by the Chargers, and mostly through Keenan Allen, who is an auto lock for a top 5 wide receiver. Mike Williams, there's a chance he could play, but at this point, even if he does, trusting him in your lineup could likely be risky. We have him ranked right inside the top 50 at wide receiver 48, just to give you an example. But if we hear more news about him or his usage, that could alter his ranking. So make sure to check an update on our site. Packers and Cowboys, we have a revenge game for Randall Cobb, which could come true. Those come true more oftentimes than not. But Dak Prescott himself has a chance to struggle, which obviously has a trickle-down effect. Cooper, we have ranked as a mid-tier wide receiver 1. Gallup and Adams, we don't really have them ranked. MVS has a really strong chance to take over as the primary target in this offense, or at least the highest upside one alongside Geronimo Allison. So if you can get them in the lineup while Adams is out, you definitely want to take advantage of that. Allison, we still have ranked outside of the top 36. But Marquez, he makes it in as a back-end wide receiver too. And the only reason for those low rankings, I would say, as compared to probably most, is just due to the fact that the Cowboys do have a good defense, so we can't take that for granted. Taking those into account, that's where we have them ranked. And the final matchup of Sunday is the Sunday night game against the Colts versus the Chiefs, which should be interesting. It does have the highest over-under, which is a trend with the Kansas City games, which means T.Y. Hilton, fire him up with confidence as long as he plays. If he doesn't, we've already seen it gives a boost to basically all players. No single player gets a giant boost in snaps or overall targets. We saw Jack Doyle get an increase in production, but with his injury, taking that big hit, even if he does play, it's no way a guarantee. But as for the receivers on Kansas City, Sammy Watkins, most people expect this to be a walk in the park for him, but remember, Indianapolis, they're a good pass defense. Patrick Mahomes is on another level though, so we still do have Watkins ranked inside of the top 12, and that's likely where he will remain until Tyreek Hill returns, who is practicing at this point, so keep an eye out for updates on that. Mecole Hardman, Robinson, those are two people who are going to take a massive hit when Tyreek Hill comes back, so if you do have those guys on your team, think of trying to ship them off after this good game, or potentially good game, because it might be a good idea to get the value while you can. In the final Monday night game, we have the Browns versus the 49ers. Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, they're both performing when their numbers called, which is great. Jarvis Landry really impressed last week in a matchup I did not think he would have success in. He's ranked as a back-end wide receiver 3, Odell. No surprise, he is a mid-tier wide receiver 1. No other receivers of note on the Browns, but the 49ers themselves, if there was a guy, odds are it would be Deebo Samuel, just based off the production that we've seen so far this season. They were on bye last week, so we are short 1 week of footage, but they're going to pick up right where they left off and leave us scratching our heads, wondering which receiver is going to be getting most of the snaps, most of the production, and most of the targets. The Browns defense themselves, they're no slouch either, so it's not as if either one of these guys were going to be missing out on too much, but without knowing exactly which one it is, there is no possible way you can trust them in your lineup. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, how about you hit that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.